So I'm going to tell a story about Athens. And I don't have to tell you about how when I heard about Athens, right away I could make analogies. It was the 1960s. But even my students at Lyon now would have a different reaction, right? It's 48 years later, and I guess 46 years later. So they have their own reactions. But then those of you who are in developing countries, I just want you to think about, is all of this stuff also true in your countries? Or do you know enough about the US, because the US has such a public platform, or whatever they want to call it, that you can see the analogies with what you know about the US, right? So what I want you to do is just think for yourself. Think about what I'm going to present to you. All right? And don't worry about what the teacher wants you to think. The teacher wants you to have a whole lot of stuff to say. This is like this, and this is like this, right? That's what the teacher wants. So here we go. And so for those of you who this is your first class, you should probably find another class. For those of you, anyway, if you have questions about the process of the class, go to the syllabus, go to the video, go to the place where I made the assignment, and then come to office hours tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Bangladesh if you have questions, right? But I don't want to talk about process, and I don't want you in your breakout groups to talk about, I don't know what's going on. Okay, just talk about Athens and analogies, either with your countries or with your perception of America. That's it. Don't change the subject. Okay, so here we go. All right. So I don't know if any of you can see me, but I'm putting on a scarf. So I'm pretending that I'm Plato, okay? I got this scarf from a student when I taught there. And she's from a minority group in Afghanistan, which makes me very worried about her. But I just was playing that I was Plato, and I said, does anybody have something I can use for a costume? So, so that's why I'm wearing this scarf. All right, so here we go. What I want you to think about is this. All right, my name is Plato. Plato is a nickname. It's a nickname for fatso, but nobody's quite sure if I was overweight or if I just had very broad shoulders because I was a wrestler, actually. But anyway, I think that I just happened to grow up in a city-state that had a very high level of culture. I didn't do that. I was born into it. And a number of my relatives had really contributed to that. And I was really proud of that. And I wanted to keep that tradition up. My uncle Solon is basically the founding father. He was given the most credit for writing the Constitution of Athens. And he was a true statesperson, statecraft, because he tried to design the city, the society, so that the rich and the poor would not have animosity. He wanted to create a middle class and to incentivize them to cooperate with each other. Because before that, the city-states, the rich would get richer and the poor would get resentful, and pretty soon there'd be a civil war. But if the poor killed off all the rich, and didn't let them have any power, they had all the brains and they had all the capacity and the skill. And so the poor would get in power, they wouldn't know what to do. And so the rich would then take over. And so there was these constant civil wars. So Solon was determined to try to weave people together. He had an amnesty on debt because debt was just such a albatross, made it so hard to have a middle class. But anyway, so I was born into this. And I wasn't patriotic. Like, there was a difference between just my city-state, right or wrong, and actually growing up in a city-state where you realize this one has a higher level of culture and civilization because it's trying to create bonds between people so that people will think like a citizen. So they'll learn how to engage in public life, public deliberation. They'll educate themselves in what sorts of laws and policies and behavior you have to engage in order to preserve a self-governing society, a society where citizens elect or appoint each other and they take turns. So you avoid authoritarianism. You avoid instability and some very wicked, power-hungry political actor says, if you elect me, I'll make us great again, or I'll bring back law and order. And then he would rule with an iron hand, right? You'd lose your free speech. You'd lose your free intellectual inquiry. So I thought Athens was great because people could freely speculate about the nature, the causes of the natural world. You know, that some people thought, well, it's always the gods, but you didn't get in trouble if you just speculated. No, I think there's a natural cause, right? You had free scientific inquiry, free medical innovations and creativity, right? Free scientific development, free expression, artistic expression, free speech, citizen engagement, public life. It was just more sophisticated. And so I felt lucky that I happened to have been born into that. So what is a political genius? What is somebody who can really create a society of self-governing citizens over time? Well, they have to know how to create a set of laws and institutions that'll promote moderation, figure out how to have an economic system that encourages a strong middle class, a criminal justice system that gives citizens the opportunity for a fair trial without favoring the rich, avoid invading other countries for wealth. So you have to avoid greed. The ruler developing the art of diplomacy instead of war so that you can negotiate settlements with other city-states, other countries, an educational system that provides opportunity for citizens to develop their talents, and also that rewards people who are the most committed and able to think about the common good. Again, how to preserve a self-governing society. So some people are smarter about that than others. You just reward the ones that are using their intelligence to rule for the benefit of the ruled. Then there's an informal system where people they come to the marketplace to talk about ideas, and they have, in our society, that we also had private, people wouldn't just go to a dinner party. They would announce it as a symposia, and they would say, okay, we're going to talk about Eros, was one that I wrote about. But, we're going to have a discussion, what is justice? Or we're going to have a discussion about what is virtue. So it's not just going to be a dinner party. So, and then the theater was also educating people emotionally so they could be good citizens. So how did we structure that, right? So we had the Parthenon, and I will show you the slides in a minute, but let me just explain it and then I'll show you the slides. It's the temple to Athena. She's the goddess of justice and wisdom, and she distinguishes between a just war and an unjust war. She has a little half brother named Ares, the god of war. He's also the god of honor. But the trouble with Ares is that he just wants to be honored for how machismo he is in a war. And so in the Iliad, and he has a double-edged sword because war kills people on both sides. It's pretty indifferent. And so in the Iliad, Ares has this sort of brutalizing. He all of a sudden just goes and brutalizes people and starts killing. And he's condemned by Hera, the goddess of honor, by his father, Zeus, the god of justice, and Athena, right? Because there really is a difference between a just war and an unjust war, and between unnecessary massacres and brutality. All right, then there's proportionality. Athena's temple is proportional because we have a natural response to that. There's organic architecture, so I'll show you that. And then there's a court, right? A court of law right next to Athena's. Because the idea is that Athena gives us, Athena gives us the love of justice, and we're supposed to exercise that, right? We're following what the gods want by actually exercising our capacity to rule for the sake of the ruled, to promote the common good. We're not supposed to say, oh, Athena will take care of it. We're supposed to be doing it. And so there you have the temple there, and then you have people doing it, but they have to do it out of honor for Athena. Their courtroom behavior has to be driven by respect for justice. Then we have the theater. The theater, the plays have people acting out people's irrational fantasies. So I don't know about you, but when somebody I really depend on, or I really love, which love is a need, or I really depend on betrays me, right? Injures me, I get really hurt and I want to take revenge, right? So we have these, at least I do, maybe you guys are perfect, I don't know, but revenge fantasies. So a tragedy will act out, like somebody actually lived out their revenge fantasy or their sex fantasy or their power fantasy, whatever, and it comes to a bad end, right? All this horrible stuff happens. And so then you think, oh, I don't really want to do that. And you flush that out. So you're not repressing those drives or desires. You're just, you learn how to habitually say, I want to take revenge. No, I don't really want to. And then you remember one of these stories, one of these plays. So you're trying to become emotionally mature. So you can use all your energy to do something creative. Then the Olympic Stadium was dedicated to a sound mind and a sound body. The temple to Hephaestus, he's the god of the crafts, and he oversees the marketplace where people come to sell their stuff. And so they do it in the shadow of Athena, the goddess of justice. So that means don't be dishonest in your dealings with people. And then the god of Hephaestus, the god of, so make things that are well crafted, you know, use decent materials, put your mind, put some effort into it, make it a work of art, not a piece of junk, and sell it at a decent price, right? So that's the whole, those two gods are sort of hanging over you as you do your business in the marketplace. And then there's two marketplaces. There's one for selling goods, and then there's one where the people who are, we had an assembly, of course we have a democracy, And people are chosen by lot, of course. It's random, but you have to be a Greek male with a certain amount of property, which again is way more limited than it would be now, but it was way greater pool of people than the other city-states had. They had just an inherited monarchy or a group of privileged families that ran the society. So we did have a much broader base. And so they would, if somebody was picked who lived out in the rural areas, then the apartments for them to stay in were in the marketplace. And then also in the assembly, there was a council that decided which issues were going to be voted on first, second, third. And so in the marketplace, you had where the council met and where the apartments were. And then you had posted what the assembly is going to vote on this week or this 2 weeks, and what trials are being discussed in the jury, in the courts. And so it was the media center, right? So everyone was, you're supposed to be informed, you're supposed to want to know about this. And then there was this big empty space where you're supposed to go talk about it. And then there are these 3 little temples to Zeus, god of justice, Athena, goddess of justice, and Ares, god of war, right? So while you're deliberating there, these 3 gods, you're supposed to honor them, right? You have to love justice, avoid war if you can help it, all those things in the marketplace. So all these signals are being sent that we want you to become informed citizens. Then we had a temple to Poseidon, the god of the sea. And we have a picture of Zeus holding a thunderbolt, the relation between science and religion. So some people thought that Zeus was the cause of the thunderbolt, but other people speculated about natural causes, and nobody minded, right? People weren't offended by that. Pericles was the great president of Athens when it was at its peak. And he had a friend who thought there was a divine mind that caused things, right? Not the gods on Mount Olympus. And that was okay, nobody complained. Then Pericles also had a concubine, a woman who was really smart. Apparently she wrote his speeches, so it was a 2-for-1 thing. And then out on the islands, there were groups of philosophers who speculated about the nature of reality, and they lived in little communities because they wanted their way of life to keep always in mind what they thought the universe was like. So they're a microcosm in the macrocosm. So the Democriteans thought everything was atoms. The word atom means the smallest thing. And so they lived. Then there were Empedocles. He thought everything was in a cycle of earth, air, fire, and water. And Pythagoreans thought that everything was number. It's all really interesting, and there's still, scientists can still identify with these different types, but I can't get into that. Then there's a temple just for women's health, because we had a very sophisticated healthcare system. And then we would go onto the islands and have conversation, because it's all about dialogue. And a beautiful soul loves truth, loves justice, loves beauty. The spiritual and the physical are combined. So that would be the goal. And then the trouble is, Hygeia is the goddess of health, and it means mind, body, spirit. And so let's go to the pictures here. Yes, okay, so here we are. Let's see, I had a way to do the whole screen, but I think I'm not going to be able to figure that out. So this is good enough for me. All right, so here we are. Here's Athens. There's the temple to Athena. And the line of the temple, the roof, follows the line of the hills because the love of justice, beauty, truth, all they are is a certain kind of animal, the human species realizing its nature, because the universe is ordered and understandable, and we are the natural creature that looks for patterns. We're by far the best at pattern recognition. Other animals engage in pattern recognition, but we're better at it for a lot of reasons, language, all sorts of mental capacities that we have evolved over time. And the reason we've developed them is they worked. They made us fit. And so we would develop, our societies would get more complex. We'd have to think in more complex ways. And that just got to the point where people understood our nature. All human beings by nature seek understanding, try to find out the pattern and educate each other. What are the patterns in good and evil? What are the patterns of the things people do that work out over time? What are the patterns of things people do that are self-destructive? So my Uncle Solon had figured out, patterns and how to structure a society to have a strong middle class, because that's the most likely to last over time. Okay, so down here on the ground, people are just engaged in business. They're living, just surviving, right? So the family unit is for mere life, and the village is the economic system. That's, people come together for economics because it's more efficient for people, for there to be a division of labor. Then after that, when you start climbing up the hill, this is living for the sake of the good life. And you go past the tragedies where you flush out all those crappy emotions, clean out your soul, and then you're ready to think about justice. And then the courthouse is over here, or over here. I'll give you a better picture of it here in a minute. There's the temple, and you walk slowly up the steps, not too fast, because you're integrating culture and nature step by step, right? You're gradually developing yourself. The beauty, you have a natural love of beauty. It's a natural response because the universe is ordered. We enjoy that. So the columns are actually designed or constructed in a way that's out of proportion, but it looks proportionate from the point of view of a human being. Then there's the temple, the rule of law, the courthouse. Then here, this is the, the theater, right? Where you go and you educate your emotions. You have that experience where, yeah, I want to be creative. I want to create a just society. I don't want to let all these old resentments and grudges and conflicts in families or with friends. I got to flush all that out if I'm going to think like a citizen. There's the Olympics. I have to stay fit. If I'm going to think clearly over time, over a lifetime, I have to keep myself physically fit. There's the temple to Hephaestus, the god of the forge. And here's the view from the temple. He's overlooking the marketplace. So there's the marketplace. And there's the open space to talk about all this stuff after you've been informed and you've checked out what's being discussed in the courts this week, what's being discussed in the assembly. Then there's the temple to Poseidon overlooking the two seas, the Mediterranean and the Aegean sort of meet down at the peninsula. There's the god of justice. There's the islands. People go to the islands. Okay, somebody's got needs to turn their mic off. Okay, person T100. Okay. Okay. Somebody's got their mic on. Please turn your mic off.
Like you can mute that person since you're the host.
Oh yeah, okay. I can mute them. Okay, just a sec. Did they quit yet? No. Okay. Dang.
You can just move your mouse on their profile picture and then in the middle there should be like
but don't I have to get back to the stop share? Don't I have to go?
It's fine. You can just do it.
Oh, I see. T100. Okay, mute. Okay, how's that? All right, good. I did it. Okay. All right, so here's the islands where people go to speculate about the universe. They live in little groups. There's the temple to Aspia, the woman's health. Here's going to the islands and having dialogues in the context of a very beautiful setting. Culture and nature are integrated. Then there's Corinth, which I'm not going to talk about, and Delphi, I'm not going to talk about. International law, that's, I guess, the main point. It's like the United Nations. And here's the statue of Hygeia, the goddess of health. I happen to have her right here next to my. So there she is. And she's pretty gender neutral, right? Sort of androgynous, as they say. And how did it get corrupted, right? What did we do? So then I have to tell you how we ruined our society. So the Persians, who are the Iranians, incidentally, invaded us. And they just had one demigod and everybody had to worship him and nobody was engaged in public life. Everybody was a slave except the guy on top. So we really thought they were low life, right? They're not, they're a lower level of civilization. Like this isn't just a power struggle. This is about truth and justice and the Athenian way. You know? We just have a better view of human nature and we have a society that cultivates capabilities better. The Persians are barbarians. And so we did defeat them. We were outnumbered 8-1, but we used our brains and they left. Okay. But then we started to go to war against Sparta. Sparta was the military state. They didn't have anybody coming, immigrating, nobody emigrating. The only thing they valued was courage in war. All they cared about was war. So the expression Spartan means that they're disciplined, nothing in excess, right? They're not self-indulgent. They're just focused on command. If you're a good soldier, you get to be a commander. If you're a good commander, you get to be a political leader. So obviously the Spartans thought the Athenians were very self-indulgent and degenerate, right? They go to plays and they have, you know, symposia and all this stuff. They're not patriotic. They don't have any respect. Their artists sit there and tell all these nasty stories about the gods and about people and all this stuff. They don't have any respect. And the Athenians thought, oh, the Spartans are such barbarians. They don't even think outside the box. Like they don't teach themselves how to think critically. They don't criticize their rulers. They're just blindly obedient. They're a bunch of barbarians, right? So, okay, the other city-states thought, you guys just kill each other off. Just keep us out of it. Leave us out of it. We don't care. but that's not true, right? So they all created these power blocks. And so they had a league of allies. And so each city-state would sort of go to a city-state, are you for us or against us? And if you're against us, we're going to wipe you out. If you're for us, the Athenians taxed their allies a lot. But the town of Melos, this particular statue was found in Melos, is sort of the epitome of what happened. Melos was located on an island that was pretty strategic, like between the Athenian peninsula and Sparta, or in a strategic location. And so the Athenians landed on Melos, and the Melians had decided, we're just going to defend our city-state. It doesn't matter who comes, Sparta or Athens, doesn't matter. We're just going to tell them to get out, you know? Well, the Athenians came and they said, look, if we have to take you, right? Because if we don't take you, the Spartans will get you, right? And then they'll have a bigger power block, or the Spartans will think we're too weak to take you and they'll go right after us, right? So you have to come, you have to join our block. And the Melians said, no, get out. And the Athenians wiped them out, okay? Like they slaughtered all their men. They sowed salt in the earth, I think. They enslaved the women and children. I mean, some degree of that, but they just really treated them in a way that was not democratic, right? So Athens supposedly was protecting the world for democracy, right? The Spartans are not democratic. You have to join our league. We're making the world safe for democracy. The trouble is, when they're figuring out how to run their league, they actually imitated the Persians. Anyway, yeah, life goes on. So the other city-states thought they were big hypocrites, right? You say you care about democracy, but you tax us so much that we can't have a democracy. We're impoverished by you. You know, you just want us to worship you and obey you. We can't have our own opinions. We have to do whatever the Athenian generals and leaders say. And so what happened? How did they corrupt their democracy? Well, first of all, where did they get the money to build all this stuff? Well, they got it from the spoils of war, and they got it from taxing their allies. And you should not benefit financially from war. If you have to go to war, you could save the money for future reference, but you should not use it, because then you have an ulterior motive, right? You're just in it for the money. So the Athenians did not heed that warning. They used the spoils of war, and they also taxed their friends to build all these monuments to celebrate democracy. And of course, that made their enemies even more angry at them, and it made their allies angry at them. So they were creating a lot of enemies in the name of democracy. And so the temple to Athena was being corrupted because people's idea of what was just was corrupted, right? They were getting into power. They were starting to care more about building an empire than about trying to promote democracy in other city-states and even in their own city-state. Even within their own city-state, they had so many military campaigns that they had to value war instead of diplomacy, right? They started to value war and conquest more than diplomacy. So the very thing they hated and made them think they were superior to Sparta, we're not a war state. They started becoming a war state. Oh, because Sparta will get us if we don't conquer here or there. So they're using their superiority over Sparta to actually become more and more like Sparta. Okay, so the proportionality, the decisions they were making were becoming less rational, less proportionate, more revenge-based, more greed-based more power for the sake of power based. The legal system was corrupted because foreigners came in to teach the sons of the privileged class how to speak persuasively. So they didn't have to teach them about virtue or justice because the foreigners said, well, I figure the Athenians teach that. I just teach them how to be persuasive so that if they are in a court, they can win. So nobody's teaching them about virtue or justice, but they're teaching them about how to win. And the same with the assembly, right? So this got to be a very expensive form of higher education. And all it did was really give the best and the brightest the power to wrap the city around their finger for money, for power, for glory. But not enough people are thinking about the common good, especially among the privileged class. Instead of cultivating practical wisdom, statecraft, they're just finding out how to become rich, powerful, and popular. So what was going on in the theater? People were thinking of it not as flushing this out, but as, oh, that's a good idea. Oh yeah, I like to take revenge. So they aren't thinking of it as something you learn not to do. They're just reinforcing, they're blaming Homer for feeding the irrational desires instead of the poets were trying to make you disgusted when people act out on those desires. The Olympics got corrupted because it got professionalized. So it was supposed to be overall wellness, right? But they started having Olympic Games, of course. Every 4 years they were in Olympia, but the other 3 years they were the Nemean Games, the games in Corinth, and the games in, I can't remember the other, Delphi, right? So instead of the city spending money on overall wellness for everyone, the city would save its money and then have this huge bash and all the spectators would come and they'd have this big orgy of drinking and partying while they're watching the athletes. And then the athletes had gotten so specialized that they were each on a very strict regimen and they weren't even that healthy if they got out of their regimens. And they had a coach who would tell the trainer, how many minutes of how much exercise to do with the guy who does the chariot races or the wrestler or the discus thrower. And so that guy would keep him on task. And then it's dusty in Greece. It's a dry country. And you always put olive oil on your skin when you're exercising. So you get this weird, awful dust mixed with olive oil. So every athlete had its own person that would take this little sort of scrubber, whatever. It was shaped like a half moon and sort of scrape off. So the idea is they all had their little entourage of professionals, So this was highly professionalized. A few people are really good at something and everybody else is a couch potato. Then the temple to Hephaestus, more and more, he had to dedicate his skills to warfare, creating swords and shields. At the marketplace, the idea was we're going to trade with people all over the world, not like the Spartans, right? We're going to have these trade agreements, and those will be friendship bonds, and you never go to war with people that you have a trade agreement with because it cripple your economy, right? But what the actual effect, right, as Athens was declining, one of the negative effects of this was, first of all, the trade deals got to be more and more unfair, right? Because the Athenians are in it for the money and the power. And then also, they became moral relativists because people would come and sell little trinkets related to their culture, city-state, and the particular deities that they worship. So it was really cool to have your house have 5 different statues of different gods or different, everything is novelty. And isn't that interesting? Diversity and pluralism. And we're such global thinkers here in Athens. But it became moral relativism, like nothing's true, right? Everything's just relative to what city-state you're growing. So it started having this moral decline, the influence, the degenerating influence. Then the temple to Poseidon, you could see the ships going off to defeat the Persians. That was great. The Persians attacked. It was a defensive war. It was a triumph for a higher level of culture. But then the ships went off, and all of a sudden the Athenians became the Persians, the empire builders. And so it got corrupted. So then, as the society was starting to decline because it was destabilizing, then the conservatives were worried, we got to get back to the good old days, and everybody has to believe that Zeus threw the thunderbolts. So all those guys who don't believe that, they're not patriotic, they're bad, right? They don't believe in the city's gods. And these guys are living on the islands partly to escape persecution. And then the women come to the first island off of the port. Some of them came because of domestic abuse, right? It wasn't all this high level woman's health, although it had a lot of that, but it also had domestic abuse issues. And so here we are, we're engaged in this conversation, right? What can you compare between Athens as an example of a society that was structured to promote cultivating people's capabilities, the good institutions and habits that it tried to nurture, and then how it got corrupted. And Socrates was the one who asked a politician, what is justice? Actually, we'll go into that next time. There's me with the hemlock. Yeah. Anyway, so the main thing is a dialogue, having a dialogue about this society, what has changed and what stays the same, right? And I really think all of you can have a really good conversation because of the different countries that you come from. So I'm just going to put you in breakout groups for 15 minutes. And one person should just agree to be the leader to make sure everybody talks. And your assignment is just to, okay, if all you want to do is just say, this really interested me, and you don't want to explain why, you just want to say, that was cool, that's fine, right? But somebody would say, oh, I think that's an analogy between something in my country, right? Or some of the students in the developing countries might say, that really sounds like what I hear about America. And then maybe some of the American students will say, no, or they'll say, yeah, or whatever. Okay, so I'm going to put you in groups of, I don't know, I tried 5 last time, and 2 out of 5 didn't have, kept falling apart with their networking. So I guess I'll try 6, although that seems like a lot to me.
Professor.
Just why don't I break them into groups? And if you have a question, you can hang on here for a minute. Okay. So I'll break you into groups of a certain size. And I do have to pause the recording, and then someone has to remind me that yeah, okay. Thanks. So I hope that the class at least gets you started thinking about political things if you haven't before, and because it's important. All of you live in situations, especially the way that women are treated, the history of the treatment of women, It seems like women who are in college would be very aware that a lot of political societies have not allowed women to go to college. And so, there had to be some kind of activism on the part of women and citizens in order to give you the opportunity to be in college. That's definitely true in the US. It's just that it was quite a while ago. So current students aren't, that engaged in the debate. But I do want you to be aware that you are political players, right? The political dimensions of your societies matter. They matter to you, and they affect whether you can develop as a person and whether you can participate in public life, and especially whether you can eventually get a leadership role. So a number of you are going to take on leadership roles, or you're also, you might work in a government or in a nonprofit. The nonprofits, of course, are internationally oriented, most of them, not all of them. But anyway, so the picturing the political dimension of life, right? That you have a lot of skin in the game, like it affects your life, what goes on at that level. So I think you should be informed, right? The Athenians, when they're sending that message, here's what's going on in the courts, here's what's going on in the assembly. You should pay attention, you should learn, and even if you're not selected as a juror, an assembly person, you find out what's going on, you try to learn from mistakes, so that when you do step up to the plate and you need to exercise power, you have a whole history behind you of knowing what happened that got your country to this point, knowing the character traits of the various actors involved. So the more you know, the better. I have students that say, well, I'm not very politically involved. It's like, how can you not be? It's like saying, I don't really breathe much. I mean, political life is part of who you are. So just like economic life is part, family life, you can't not have been from a family. So I hope that you pay attention to it, that you start in college, start deciding, I'm going to be more informed after going to college. All right, so let me talk about Socrates is the character who Plato admired. He had these character traits. So the class is structured around a certain idea of a flourishing human being, has certain character traits, which they exercise in their public life and in their relationships to other people. Most of the character traits can only be developed in relationship to other people. So, whether or not, how you eat is quite a bit controlled by you, but not entirely, right? The society will give you opportunities or lack thereof and all that sort of stuff. But what you're afraid of and what you fantasize about and your pleasures are more personal than other things, but everything else, you can't exercise generosity except in relation to people. You can't be even tempered except in a context with other people. So friendship is relating to other people, the love of beauty. So these are all, each dialogue sort of talks about a different issue in Athens, and Socrates is Plato's model of the best person. So let me just give you one example here. In relation to courage, so you have these wars going on. So the definition of courage is knowing how to face situations involving fear. So of course, in war, there's immediate fear of survival, right? And so that comes out quite a bit. But you can overreact and underreact. So you can engage in war too soon just to prove how courageous you are, or you can put yourself in dangerous situations unnecessarily just to prove how courageous you are. But that just does damage, right? Unnecessary suffering. Your city-state will get a reputation for being brutal, excessively aggressive. So the conversation that Socrates has in the dialogue is with two generals. They had a great reputation for being good soldiers and good generals. And they follow certain types. And these types are still around. So Laches was the guy who liked to get out there in the field and, face the enemy and get the job done. And he didn't question too much of whether the people above him were sending him to war for their own power at his expense or for their own money at his expense. He just liked to prove himself. And so because he didn't question enough, he ended up engaging in a battle where he didn't wait for the support people to come in so that they could finish off the Spartans. He just went down earlier because he thought it would show how much more courageous he was. And then he ended up losing. So he overreacted. That was one of his problems. And then Nicias was the guy up in the military brass, it's called, the guy who gives the orders. And he was very strategic. So you wouldn't go to war unless you really knew you're going to win, and you do it in a very strategic way. And he had a good reputation too. But then the Athenians decided they wanted to go to war against Sicily, and Nicias said, no, we don't have enough arms for that. But they voted for it anyway. And so Nicias had to lead this campaign. And he fought as well as he could, but it ended up in a disaster. So you can overreact in war and fight too soon. You can become so strategic that you don't even want to fight in necessary wars that are dangerous and maybe even very risky. So there's all this judgment call. So the idea is that virtue, you can't define it, okay? So courage is facing fear, but then you have to take that and you have to deal with situations in your life, practical situations. And that's when we start talking about it. Okay, so during coronavirus, right? So you were afraid, people panicked, right? And then they started to recover. So the whole trigger of fear, all of you have been through that, I think, in a lot of ways in the last year. Climate change issues are going to bring on a lot of dangerous situations that you'll have to deal with. You have your COVID and your health problems. And so there's people who overreact and they get too fearful. And then there's people who underreact and say, it's nothing to be afraid of, right? But we have a lot of, we disagree with each other about how much to fear coronavirus, about what to do about it, about how much to fear climate change. So we're always debating about this. That's what I want you to realize. What about fear of pain, fear of sickness, fear of aging? All of these things, when they're excessive, they really ruin people's lives personally, but they also have this terrible negative effect on the culture. So that's what we're trying to get at, is this model of a virtuous life. Let me see. What else? Whoops, that's not how you do it. So I have to go back. to, oh, Socrates is doctor of the soul. Oh God, let me see how I did this. Okay, I'll go over here. All right, so so that's kind of that section of the class, and then I only have 10 minutes. And so this obviously we're gonna carry over into the next class, but let me explain. And I really want you to think, right? You need to participate in the breakout groups because that's what your posts are about. So here, again, you can hang out after class. I don't want questions in the next 10 minutes. I'll hang out as long as you want. But here's the thing. At the end of every week, so that would be at the end of today, those of you who have come to both classes this week, for each day, you had to read something, even if it was just an outline, it wasn't a lot. Or the Lion students actually had an earlier class. So you have your thoughts about the reading for the day, what you want to bring into the conversation, right? So that's why in the breakout groups, there isn't any reason for people to have nothing to say, right? Now, it's true if this was your first class, but again, I can't believe that you didn't have thoughts about something that I said. So but if the conversation falters, you need to come right back to see me and I don't want to waste time. Okay, so you have your 3 reactions, then you have 3 things that you learned from other people in the class, because I want you to learn how to listen and to learn how to learn from each other and to think of yourselves as a whole generation that's going to have to deal with sexism, racism, the relationship between the rich and the developed and the developing countries, climate change. You're going to have to deal with all this stuff. And so that's something you have in common as members of the same generation. So you should have an interest in what each other says, your own experiences, what you bring to the table, what you would like to do for your country or for the global culture and civilization. So you should have a lot of ideas about this because you're going to get pulled right into it. All of you are, because you go to college and especially a good liberal arts school, you'll be expected to take some leadership roles, right? Or some just in private conversations to take on a more sophisticated understanding of what's going on around you. So that's why I assign you that I'm going to grade you on what you learned from other people. And then the third part of the post, what's your takeaway from that class? So for today, you have to write a total of 200 words, but you have to write about what did I get from this class? And you're just going to have to pick your brain because you can't walk away from a class saying, I don't know what that was about. Let's go to the next one. You absolutely have to write down that here's what I learned. So you're going to have to think about it. And the total is 200 words. And that's for each class. So if you have 2 classes in a week, it's 400 words. And then you post it on the post. And I announce those assignments. Let's see, where's the announcement I know where there it is. There's the announcement for that class. And then the other class also has an announcement. Okay, so for next time, I have 8 minutes. I want you to read Plato Has a Dialogue. This is the text. If it's confusing, it's not the kind of thing where oh yes, 2 + 2 is 4, and I'm going to get a test on it. It's a conversation. So you have to use your imagination. Have you ever had a conversation with someone about God, what Allah or what God wants, or whether there's a God or not, or why you wouldn't want to believe in God, or what you learned growing up, what your parents said, what, then you understand people grow up differently. So this is a religious leader. What kind of religious leaders do you respect? Some religious leaders tell people not to get the COVID shot, right? Other religious leaders tell them, get the COVID shot. Some, just think of something related to you. Some religious leaders say women shouldn't go to college. Other religious leaders say women should go to college. People disagree about what God wants, right? About what's pious, what's holy, what's sacred. So this particular thing gives different definitions. So if you find the dialogue too confusing or too long, just skip to the cheat sheet, right? And look at the definitions of holiness. Then September 11th, here's what was going on in the US. People disagreed about what the heck, if there was a God involved in this or not. And then those of you from other countries should think about, do you have religious leaders that claim they know that God is involved in COVID, or God has a hand in this or that? And what do you think when they start talking like that? Okay, let's see. So then you can go through those if you want. Oh, girl. Oh, this one is just about a friend of mine whose child was killed, died of SIDS. And so that's just, and then I have some other ones related to America, and you can, you don't have to, the Americans can read this. The non-Americans can just read the first and compare it to some other event where somebody's child is killed. Do people say it's God's will, or how do people deal with unjust suffering? This one is another one for the Americans. The one that and here's another one, and those of you who aren't Americans, you might be interested, but here's one about tsunami. So this one, we have Untari from Indonesia, and there was a huge tsunami in Aceh. And I've actually been to Aceh. I suppose Untari has too. And it's still very moldy, and it's just kind of grim place. But the editorial writers have different ideas of whether this is something related to God or not, right? So one of them says, where was God? And then he has his opinion about that. And then another one says, actually, we could have used our reason and prevented this whole thing, but we're too stingy. So he's going with secular humanism. He's just saying, we're supposed to use our brains to help each other out, and we didn't do it. And so it's on us. It's not on God, right? And then the next one was how it is that people didn't start dying from dysentery and cholera from bad water after the tsunami. And the reason was because we got experts in there, we got authorities in there. And so then the question is that what God wants us to do? So the Greeks said, yeah, Athena wants us to use our capacity for justice. That's why we got these capacities from the gods. So some people would say God wants us to use our reason. Other people would say, skip God. We have these minds. We're supposed to use them. And then the last one was how cheap and stingy we are per person. So that's just those are different perspectives. So what's going to happen when we start having these big climate events? What are people going to be saying? Or what do they already say? What about COVID? What do people say about COVID? So start using analogies, right? Start realizing, okay, if you happen to go to college when this tsunami hit, here's what the editorial writers were thinking. Now you're going to college during COVID. What would be the equivalent? What do you think? So we're talking, what I wanted to point out here is, yeah, there's different ways of thinking about the relationship between faith and reason, right? So I just made up 12 explanations, and you can make up some more of your own. You could make up your own, right? So I want you to write down, which one of these do I disagree with, or some combination, or none of the above, and what do I think? Because it's fine with me if you disagree with all 12. But in the process of reading them, you'll come to know your own mind. That's what I really want. You start to know your own mind, right? How does your mind work? How do you want it to work? How do you want to think about COVID, climate change, all this stuff that's going on all around you? All right, so that's what I want you to do for next time. And it doesn't matter that much to me if you get through the dialogue, the Euthyphro dialogue. What really matters is that you start thinking about this issue, right? What is the relationship between reason? Should we just decide, skip God, let's use our reason, make a better world? Or should we say, yeah, I do believe in God. God wants me to use my reason. Or no, using reason is arrogant. You're replacing God. It means you don't have faith. And then whatever you think, if there are other people who think differently from you. And that is going to be the main theme next time. All right, so you may go. It's 10:39 according to my clock. So please go. Last time the students said, may we go? Yes, you may go. But I will stay here if anybody has questions. I did take attendance. I did mention, so Shinaz, I think maybe when I was taking attendance, did you lose and use juice once in a while? Let's see.
Goodbye, Dr. Beck. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye, Rossi. Is that help? My foot is stuck in my shoe. Thomas. What are you? Okay, sorry.
Dr.
Okay.
Beck, I have a question.
Yeah, okay, Samantha.
My question is for the writing the 400 words for both of these sessions. Do you want us to turn that in? My first question of that is, when is that due?
Well, I put the due date on there. It's somewhere between Thursday noon and Friday noon. Okay.
Okay. And then my second question is so when we're doing these turn-in assignments, is it the Sunday, then Tuesday, and then that's what goes on to that? Or do you want us to wait till the end of this week and turn
No,
all the three of those in?
When the 2 days are 2 days together,
Okay.
that's a week. And you guys, the US people just have 3 classes for the first post.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Professor,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Actually, at this time, my connection was, I think my connection was not well. And I have so much internet problem here because I'm in Myanmar. That's why I didn't take my name. I didn't hear when you called me. Can you please take my name?
Okay. So actually, let me stop the recording here.